first thing I do is I take a small board or a large board, depending on whatever the piece is. This is just kind of a play board, and I paint a design on it, and I use India ink and casein white. And sometimes the design comes out in a few minutes, and sometimes it takes a few days, and I just keep painting and painting and painting. Once I have the design done for these woodblock panels, I take these little tools. These are just regular woodcutter's tools, and I can't find them in Santa Rosa. I have to special order these things. The ones in Santa Rosa are generally student quality tools. And then I just start cutting away. How I cut the white out.
Some of your blocks are intended for printing, and some of your blocks are intended to be displayed as blocks, as carved blocks.
And that shows up if I'm designing a block for display purposes. I generally work with fairly large, or for me, fairly large forms. If I'm printing a block for a woodcut, then I get very delicate, and they usually take a lot more time, maybe twice as long or 3 times as long to cut. The blocks that I use are generally pine or birch plywood, and when you paint on them in casein, the water dries out the first, let's say, 1/4 inch of the wood, so it cuts. And you want a wood that you can cut a circle, scribe a circle around like this, and not get too much pickup, too many rough edges.
What's the basis for your designs? Just expression of your own? Or?
Sometimes I work with social commentary. Sometimes I work with just plain design, just for the sake of design, and decorative panels. It depends on if I feel like I have anything to say. When I'm drawing, I usually just turn on the TV and sit there with the TV on, wait for the commercials, and then start picking away at them or listen to the news. That gets to be a lot of fun once in a while, but in this case it's just a plain design. Now these knives are all different shapes. This is a small V-veiner, and you make a lot of mistakes when you cut, and then as you make mistakes you have to figure out a way to incorporate the mistakes into the design. I mean, so what you start with is not necessarily what you come out with. You can be reasonably sure that it'll be fairly close, but it'll never be exactly. So if you show somebody a drawing and they say, "Oh, that's great," then you have to warn them that it might change a little as you go along. There are different kinds of knives. There are V-veiners, there are spoons. Spoon, you get I don't know if this will be visible on camera, you get a different kind of a cut. Sometimes the cutting goes very quickly, and sometimes it goes very slowly. And it looks easy, but I usually end up putting quite a few hours in on the cut. And then there's no one right way to cut. The only thing you don't do is you don't cut like this and go through your hand. And this is just some of the things. Sometimes, in fact quite often, if you painted a lot on the board, you have to spend a long time scraping down the surface of the paint. And once you get the board cut out, and I'm not going to cut out this whole board, once you get the board cut out, then you go to an inking process, and I'll just very briefly explain that right here. You take a roller, and let's see if I can find a roller. Here's a roller. You take a roller, and this roller is about 3,000 years old, and it's not very good anymore, but I love it anyways. And you roll it with ink. This as an example, this is an ink palette. I'll set that down right here. And assuming I had put ink on the palette, you take a little ink and you roll it on nice and evenly, and then you roll over the surface of the board. Now there is a secret here. If you're printing if you're doing an ink block for a print, you use a straight ink. If you're using an ink block for decorative purposes, then you have to play around with the chemistry of the ink, because you don't want any reflection at all
off the raised
and
surfaces.
You have to add all sorts of retarders and dryers to the ink, and they're fairly expensive, but if you're doing a commission for somebody, you have to consider that as part of the commission cost. The woodblock things are just some of the things I do. I draw quite a bit. I do a lot of cartooning, a lot of social commentary, as you can see by the stacks of drawings around the room. And the paintings, now, I don't know, I consider the paintings part of my first love. It's a very time-consuming thing. Some of these paintings take 80 to 100 hours. The ones you see in the room, these head figures, are done in acrylic on a masonite panel. They're washes over washes. Sometimes I go over the same form 30 or 40 times. They're very tight paintings. They're very colorful paintings. And they're very social. A lot of people ask what they are, and they say they're football players, and are they this or are they that? What they really represent is a group study on the lack of communication between people, the secretive, helmeted seclusion that even when you're in a large group of people, you find people unable to communicate with each other about what they feel or how they want to do things, unable to communicate. And that's what the paintings, they're very decorative, and yet they're very social in their comment, and some people like them just as a decorative quality. Some people start reading into them, and some people, when I sell a painting, people quite often will say, well, I'm just going to put it in a den and nobody else can see it, because I just want to look at it myself. But they're very private paintings. Some of the drawings are very private paintings.
That's an example of the painting we're just looking at.
Yeah. And I really enjoy the painting. It's kind of a therapy. It gives me a lot of time to be by myself, even though the room is crowded. I guess I suffer from the same thing that the paintings represent in that respect.
And this piece here, this round woodcut, what is this?
This is one of several blocks I did. I did about 7 or 8 of these blocks about 8 or 10 months ago. It's done on a piece of plywood. It's a 4 by 4 foot circular block that I have made up especially for this thing. I did some of these decorative blocks, just straight non-objective design, and then I did this one as a California landscape, an oak tree.
You did a series of these?
No, I just did this one block like this, but I did a series of circular blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very interested in the rolling hills and the pine trees and the fields. Coming from Wisconsin, you have a few rolling hills, but most of the land is flat. And you don't have much variety in the trees, and the trees are generally just all straight up. You don't have things like a lot of burrowed trees. In California, I'm just fascinated by the trees, and what I tried to do here was I tried to get this immense strength that a pine tree has. You know, with the lines curving this way and the lines curving this way. The feel for the rough trunk and the roots coming out of the tree like this. it's almost a human form. I'm fascinated by the similarity between man, the anatomy of man, and the anatomy of nature. Even in rocks, you sometimes see this.
You can feel the musculature and the roundness along the trunk and along the root portions.
It's, to me, it's almost grotesque, but I don't like to use the word grotesque because too often people get a misinterpretation of it. To me, it's a very vital thing. I'm interested in very vital movement that an oak tree has, or even a redwood has. You know, even though a redwood's very straight, it's a very vital tree. I'm interested in doing large panels of these things.
You've done walls. Large panels before. I've seen some. What?
I've done some 8 by 8 foot panels, 8 by 10 foot panels. I've done a 10 by 10 foot panel, a non-objective wall. I've done a 10 by 14 foot panel. Now these are all in the woodblock things. I also work in three-dimensional walls. I don't have any samples of that here. I had some photographs, but they're stacked under these piles of drawings.
A three-dimensional is a wood surface built away from the...
Built away. Some of these have 4 and 5 inch reliefs where I build up pieces one on top of the other until I get exactly what I want. I'm in the process of completing negotiations for with a large corporation here in the area to do a 12 by 18 foot wall. I expect to start on that very soon. And you know, it's kind of a fascinating thing. It's kind of a therapy for me because it's really vital. Each of the different phases that I work in, I go from one to the other. As I get tired and run out of ideas for one, I go into the other.
You change materials and change the way you work. I mean, I have the feeling of roundness in this, but this is a completely other material. This is your painting instead of your wood block again.
There's a tremendous difference, and my philosophy about that is that switching materials, whether you're working in clay or whether you're working in wood or whether you're working with acrylic or oil paint or any of the different media that a person could possibly work with in art, is all you have to do is learn what the new media is going to do for you. It might take you a week to get used to it. It might take you a month to get used to the new material. You just have to learn what the new material can do for you, and then the most important thing is what you do with it. You know, if you have something to say with wood, you say it. If you have something to say with acrylic, you say it. It took me 5 years to learn how to use the acrylics this way, for instance. Oil painting I use differently. Oil, I get very, very active with the oils, and the acrylics I get in there and I get very tight with them. And I love it. You know, it's great.
Shakespeare close to Shakespeare of Seas? I think
Which one?
that little close to Shakespeare.
The one that was broken? That broken reel? Oh, the new one?
Yes.
No, I don't want. In fact, I'd like you to go and get the notes out.
I want
No kids. Hey, Aaron, put that
to.
down.
I'll tell you, Dad, I have money.
What?
What money?
Did you find some money on the couch? Your mother probably found it.
The off TV?
No, you can't come in. I'm trying to get Jay.